October 2009. A new government takes power in Athens and opens the accounting books. The world is about to receive a shock that will shake the very foundations of Europe. The confession is brutal. For years, the numbers had been falsified. The budget deficit was not 6% as declared, but more than double that. In an instant, trust evaporates. Panic spreads across the markets. Greece is on the brink of bankruptcy. The world asks a single question: how could this have happened? The answer seemed simple. A nation had lived beyond its means. But that is not the full story. To truly understand what almost destroyed the euro, we cannot look for a single culprit, but must have the courage to face the entire complex reality. And we truly invite you to watch this video from beginning to end to discover why the Greek crisis has, even today, many years later, created a serious danger for you, even if you are not Greek. Welcome to Amazing Europe. So, how did it come to this point? The story of Greece's internal flaw begins with an obsession, joining the most exclusive club in the world, the euro. But there was a huge, unspoken problem. The country's finances were a disaster and did not meet the strict entry requirements of the Maastricht Treaty. Two parameters, in particular, were non-negotiable. The annual deficit had to stay below 3% of GDP, and total debt had to remain under 60% of GDP. Greece violated both in a blatant way. A way was needed to make billions in debt disappear from the books, not to fix the country, but to sweep the dust under the rug. What was needed was a little financial magic. That magic, or rather, that deception, came from Wall Street. With the help of giants like Goldman Sachs, Greece set up a financial alchemy operation. Through a financial instrument called a cross-currency swap, billions of debt in dollars and yen were exchanged for euros at an artificial exchange rate, not the real market rate. This move allowed the operation to be recorded not as a loan, which would have increased the debt, but as a simple currency transaction, magically erasing about 2.8 billion euros of debt from the books. It was a trick that allowed Greece to show up in Brussels with seemingly proper accounts. And in 2001, the trick worked. Greece entered the euro. The reward was immediate and intoxicating. The country gained access to a flood of cheap money. For the first time, Greece could borrow at almost the same rate as solid, trustworthy Germany. It was like giving the keys of a supercar to a reckless driver with an infinite fuel tank. Public spending exploded. The 2004 Olympics became the symbol of regained greatness, but turned into a bottomless pit, with final costs estimated around 9 billion euros, twice the original budget. But that was not the only waste. The public sector swelled enormously, and salaries for government employees became significantly higher than those in the private sector, used more as a tool for political consensus than as a driver of efficiency. Military spending, fueled by long-standing tension with Turkey, remained among the highest in Europe relative to GDP, making Greece one of the world's top importers of conventional weapons between 2005 and 2009. A generous pension system completed the picture, and while the state spent without restraint, a large share of private wealth stayed in the shadows. Endemic and almost tolerated tax evasion, estimated at tens of billions of euros per year, deprived the state of the resources needed to sustain that party. It was a completely dysfunctional system, a house of cards built entirely on the blind trust of the markets. But debt is a two-way street. For every borrower who spends recklessly, there must be a lender who lends without caution. And the lenders were lined up at the door. The creditors were the largest banks in Europe, mainly French and German ones. For nearly a decade, they flooded Greece with loans, chasing easy profits. But let's be clear, these profits did not directly enrich ordinary French or German citizens, but rather the shareholders and executives of those financial institutions. And the governments of Berlin and Paris? They knew. Of course they knew. But turning a blind eye was extremely convenient. It allowed their industries to export at full capacity to a market, Greece, artificially inflated by debt. German cars and French luxury goods poured into Athens, bought with money borrowed from German and French banks. It was a perfect vicious cycle that generated profits for the north and debt for the south. Everyone believed in a single dogma: A country within the Eurozone cannot go bankrupt. Lending to Greece seemed like a golden deal, higher returns than German bonds with apparently zero risk. But that illusion of safety was the most deceptive part of the trap. The euro was a golden cage. But pay attention, it was not the euro itself that was the problem, but the system built around the single currency. So why did the euro turn into a cage? Because the project was missing a fundamental pillar, the fiscal union. To understand this, let's take the United States as an example. When a hurricane devastates Florida, federal funds automatically flow from across the country to support reconstruction. No one talks about a bailout of Florida or imposes austerity on the citizens of Miami. It is an automatic solidarity system embedded in the nation's DNA that allows tax money from wealthy California to pay for healthcare in struggling Mississippi. The Eurozone had nothing like this. Each country was an economic island left alone to face the storm. And without this kind of safety net, the cage had no release valves. A country with its own currency, when hit by a crisis, devalues. Greece could not. The only possible way out was internal devaluation, brutally cutting wages, pensions, and the living standards of its people in order to regain competitiveness through pain. This is not theory, it is history. Look at Iceland. Hit hard by the 2008 crisis, what did it do? It allowed its biggest banks to fail, forcing foreign creditors to bear the losses. It devalued its currency, the krona, suddenly making its exports competitive. It blocked the flight of capital. It chose to save its people, not its bankers. Greece, trapped within the rigid architecture of the euro, plunged into a depression comparable to that of the 1930s. It was a system that seemed to benefit everyone. Northern Europe exported goods and capital, backed by the stability of a strong currency. Southern Europe imported those goods and capital, financing a growth that seemed unstoppable. But it was a dangerous imbalance, made possible precisely by that incomplete architecture. This was the external flaw, a magnificent monetary construction built to function only under clear skies. And in 2009, the storm had arrived. The system was about to be tested to its breaking point. A fire always begins with a spark, and the spark was the fall of Lehman Brothers and the 2008 crisis. A few months later, for Greece, the party was over. The following year, the new Greek government confessed the truth to the world. We lied to you. Our accounts are a disaster. The storm had arrived, and with it, panic. No one wanted to lend Greece a single cent anymore. In Berlin, Paris, and Frankfurt, leaders realized that the problem was no longer Greece. The real threat was contagion. Their own banks were full of that toxic debt, worth hundreds of billions. A Greek default would have triggered a domino effect, a chain reaction that could have shattered the entire European financial system. A financial apocalypse. They faced a terrifying dilemma. Option A: let Greece go bankrupt, applying the treaty rules and forcing private creditors, their banks, to take the losses, while risking the collapse of the entire system. Option B: intervene. A decision was made to create an unprecedented crisis committee, an entity that answered to no electorate, the Troika. Their mission was to orchestrate a rescue. But rescue whom? The first bailout package amounted to 110 billion euros, a colossal sum. But in exchange, the Troika imposed the cure, a brutal austerity program. Cuts to wages, pensions and healthcare. We were told it was a bitter but necessary medicine to heal Greece. Public opinion in Northern Europe, especially in Germany, was furious. Their media spoke of lazy Greeks being saved with taxpayers' money. Greece became the perfect scapegoat. But the reality was different, and the numbers do not lie. Independent studies revealed the truth. Over 90% of that money never entered the Greek economy, never saved pensions, never supported salaries. It merely made a technical stop in Athens before being immediately transferred to those who were truly being rescued: the original creditors, the major French and German banks. It was not a bailout of Greece. It was a colossal transfer of risk. The private debt of the banks, a risk they had willingly taken in pursuit of profit, was transformed into public debt, placed on the shoulders of European citizens, and repaid through the suffering of the Greek people. And the cure? It was a cure that, according to most economists, could never work. Imposing drastic cuts during a deep recession is like taking oxygen away from a drowning man. The Greek economy did not recover. It collapsed even faster, causing the debt-to-GDP ratio to explode and making a second bailout necessary in 2012. The situation worsened dramatically in 2015. After 5 years of devastating austerity, the Greek people elected a new government led by Alexis Tsipras with a clear mandate to end the torture. Tsipras tried to renegotiate the bailout terms but hit an impenetrable wall. To break the deadlock, he called a referendum, asking his people whether to accept or reject the Troika's new, harsh conditions. It was a bold move, an attempt to use democracy as a negotiating weapon. But the Troika responded with a ruthless show of force. The European Central Bank cut off emergency liquidity to Greek banks. Without euros, ATMs ran dry. The country was on the brink of collapse. On July 5th, the Greek people voted with a brave and defiant no. But the government, with no functioning banking system left, was forced to surrender and sign a third, even harsher, bailout plan. At that moment, it became clear to everyone. This was no longer about economics, it was about power. And after the storm? Officially, Greece is an economic miracle. After exiting the bailout program in 2018, its economy has outperformed much of Europe. Tourism has reached historic records, international investments have returned, and the Greek state, for the first time in decades, has a budget surplus, a resurrection. But if you scratch beneath the surface of this glittering postcard, you find another Greece. A Greece that still bears the deep scars of the cure. For millions of people, the miracle never arrived. In concrete terms, this means that while GDP grows, the purchasing power of the average citizen is among the lowest in the Eurozone, eroded by persistent inflation on basic goods and fuel. It is a two-speed recovery. The growth of tourism, driven by programs such as the Golden Visa, which offers residency in exchange for investments, has pushed Greeks out of their own cities with unaffordable rents. Athens has become one of the most expensive capitals in Europe compared to the average salary. Foreign investments have modernized ports and airports, but austerity cuts have left the public healthcare system on its knees with staff shortages and endless waiting lists. Unemployment has decreased, but often through precarious and low-paid jobs, because in a pressured economy, workers' rights are the first to be sacrificed. This same logic explains why 500,000 young talents have left the country. In a nation whose priority is to repay the past, there is little room to invest in the future. It is not only an economic loss, it is a psychological scar on a generation raised with a sense of uncertainty and the feeling that the future is always mortgaged. But why is this recovery so fragile and divided? Because a massive ghost looms over every success: debt. We are not talking about an abstract number, but about the debt-to-GDP ratio. It measures how indebted a country is compared to the wealth it produces in a year. Today, Greece's ratio stands at around 140%, the highest in the entire Eurozone. This colossal burden dictates every decision. It forces the nation to generate a primary surplus each year, a profit before even paying interest, simply to prove itself a reliable debtor. Billions of euros every year that, instead of being invested in healthcare, education, or higher wages, are used to repay the decisions of the past. It is supervised freedom, not true recovery. And this fragility brings us to the final lesson, which reveals the danger we face today, even for those who are not Greek. But before revealing it, if you found our video informative, we kindly ask you to support our project with a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss our new videos. And don't forget our other channel, America vs. Europe, where we compare all European countries, the United States and Canada, across various factors. Greece's fragility taught a crucial lesson to European leaders. Saving banks with taxpayers' money is a politically explosive solution. The image of entire nations brought to their knees to rescue irresponsible bankers had fueled anger, protests, and above all, had torn apart the very soul of Europe. On one side were northern taxpayers, told that it was all the fault of the lazy Greeks, who felt robbed. On the other side were southern Europeans, increasingly convinced that the euro was a cage designed to transfer their wealth to northern banks. This division, this growing anger, meant that European citizens would never accept it again. So, leaders changed the rules of the game, creating a solution that was more technical, faster, and, in a sense, more ruthless. The first application of the new rules took place in Cyprus in 2013. No longer a bailout, but a bail-in, a technical term for a brutal concept. If a bank fails, the first to pay are no longer the states. They are its creditors and its large depositors. In Cyprus, anyone with more than 100,000 euros in the bank lost almost half of their savings, used to fill the holes. What does this have to do with you? Everything. Because that rule, born as an emergency solution, is now law throughout the European Union through the Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive. The paradigm has changed. Yesterday, to stop contagion, the target was the welfare of an entire nation. Today, the target is much smaller, much more precise, savings above the 100,000 euro guarantee threshold. And in this clash of narratives, we have learned that the answer to the question who is to blame was far more complex than we thought, and it forced us to look at figures and institutions we had never considered before. The lesson of Greece, therefore, is not that your country could be the next to suffer austerity. The lesson is that the system has learned to be more efficient at sacrificing someone in order to save itself. The question is not whether it will happen again. The question is, are you ready to play by these new rules? In this video, we explain in more detail the financial crises of 5 Eurozone nations. We strongly recommend watching it to get a broader understanding of the situation. That's all for this video. See you next time.